Sushi. If I'd said in market research, would you like to eat raw fish off conveyor belts with robots serving the drinks? You're not going to say yes. By the same token, when we open the hotels, I say, would you like to sleep in a 7 square metre room with no natural light? Because the windows in the early hotels looked out onto the corridor. Nobody's going to say yes. But when they walked into those hotels, people said, this is amazing. Because it was such detail. It was like them inside of an aeroplane or a private yacht or something like that. People said, the magic words are, this is so obvious. Why hasn't somebody done this before? And that's what I'm after.
Simon, what a pleasure to have you on, the founder of Yo Sushi. Looking at what you've been up to, it's really clear that you really show your vulnerability and you're very honest about your journey to date. One thing that's really clear is that you love to give to people. Talk to me about that.
Look, I'm as selfish as the next person, and I always have been. I think what happens in life is that you find little talents that you have, and there are a lot of things I'm not talented at, but actually seeing what people can do, and yeah, I think I have a talent for that, and it's fun to exercise your talent. Like I learnt when I started Yo, I learnt to draw on CAD, I learnt to do accounting. Somebody asked me to do public speaking. I never knew I could do that, and I did it. And in the same way that I've done social media, I've been doing quite a bit of that recently and talking to people. And you just follow your nose to what's enjoyable. So I wouldn't say I'm altogether altruistic, but it's very gratifying when people say that's made a big difference to me. Yes, that's true.
So it's interesting that because a lot of people talk about how important the first steps are to trying things and having that mentality. And are there some experiences you can look back on that make you feel like that gave you that mentality? Do you think it was the way you were brought up, or your experience in trying new things, or curiosity? What gives you this?
It's the big question, isn't it? It's what's genetic and what's experience. I don't know what's genetic, but certainly my experience growing up, I think I had a fairly difficult childhood. I had a sort of controlling dad and a very emotional mum, and not a great deal was talked about in the family home. And I probably, actually, the word I've always used, I think I probably grew up with low self-esteem covered up with bravado. And the bravado has lasted to this day. So I've used it to my advantage, I think. But I think, certainly with entrepreneurs, I think one of the things I've observed is that there needs to be a bit of grit in the oyster, something that needles you, or something you think you can do better, or a desire to prove yourself, or whatever it is for you. So if your audience is listening and you're one of those slightly difficult people, or a bit chippy or angry or whatever, I'll tell you what, you're in the right place. It's going to get you out doing things. So don't go and get too well adjusted. It certainly has driven me to go and do things and try and prove myself. So it's, in that respect, I think you can analyse all sorts of things psychologically, but certainly being a bit chippy. I'm not now. You can see me now. I'm easy with life, but it hasn't always been easy, and that has got me going.
Looking back early on in your journey, it's before the days of in the restaurant world, I'd love to hear a bit more, because there was a stint you spent in jail.
That is true, yeah.
And which is such an extraordinary fact, an experience that you've had. So many people have those moments. Certainly some of the most interesting people I know have had those moments where they've been in such a situation where they've really had to learn about themselves in such a unique way. Talk to us about how those tough moments have served.
But actually, I have to admit to you something, Arthur, is that before I did this little interview with you, I did look at one of the others you had done, and the first question you asked your interviewee was, tell me about yourself. So I thought, I'd better think about that. So I thought that what I would say if I was asked that question was that I left school when I was 16 with 2 O-levels. And soon after, in my sort of what you referred to, my first really entrepreneurial endeavor was on a very small scale at the age of 17 in 1969, that would be. I was busted for drugs and went to jail, to young person's jail for 3 months. So that was a big influence, not least of which is don't ever break the law. It's not fun.
Yeah.
And then I joined the rock and roll circus. I went on the road really as a roadie, putting lights up in the very early days of rock shows. And from there I became a stage designer and did a lot of big rock shows, from Motorhead to the Moody Blues to Elton and Rod and all those people. And I was a stage designer. And then we did that. I did that through till about 1985, and 1985 was the year of the big live rock show events, which was Live Aid. And I thought I'd better get out of this business before I get found out. And I'm very proud of what I did when I look back now, but that's what it felt like at the time. And I got lost for yet again in my life, and I reinvented myself in the television world, selling television rights. I knew the managers of a lot of the big rock bands, and I sold television rights when MTV was just emerging and onto the scene. And what did I do then? And then I did extreme sports for television, and then I got lost again and got divorced, and came up with Yo Sushi one way or another. And that's a very brief nutshell of the story of my life.
Yeah.
And my influences.
It's funny. It's an amazing song called the Sun Cream song. I don't know if you've come across it on YouTube, which I'd recommend to anyone. But there's one line which is super fantastic, which talks about how people's lives change. It'll be some idle random Tuesday where you'll meet someone or you'll hear news that changes your life. And it sounds like your journey, or at least many people's journeys, have come through strange moments which have inspired them and led them into trying things. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the entrepreneurial story. It's a series of happenstance. I think if you go to university and you study accountant and you become an accountant, you can pretty well map out a world and how life will unfold for you. If you don't have that, and certainly I didn't, because I didn't have the qualifications and I was a rock and roller in many ways. Yeah, I had a business partner when I was in the stage design business called Jeremy Tom, and his previous company, he was a character, and his previous company was called Say Yes. And he did film production and all these sort of things. But basically his thing was, I'll just say yes to everything. And I remember picking that up, and I suppose I've carried that with me. And generally, whether it's coming to do a podcast with you or whatever it is, I try to say yes as much as possible without thinking about it too much very often. People think, I've got to be careful, I've got to have the right PR to check with things and things. And I found that, you talked about me being honest and vulnerable, I've found that by being like that, by being myself, I haven't set out to say I'm going to be a super honest person, but that's become my modus operandus. And it's never got me into trouble. I suppose if it got me into trouble, I would have stopped doing it. So it hasn't. So I find that certainly with journalists, in the old days of journalists, I was popular with journalists, is the truth, because I talked to them about how things were. Yeah. And actually also, I was always interested in what they were doing and what was interesting. And I gave them my personal number and said, call me anytime. And as a result, I got obviously attracted a lot of attention. But I think I got a lot of attention because, getting into another realm here, but I didn't talk about, in the restaurant world, for example, and I've been in many different businesses, but I didn't talk about how good the food was or how great the ambience was, because everybody's going to say that, but I talked about the world and life and everything according to me. And I was very aware that if you give people good copy, if you give people good and interesting stories, they're going to publicize you. That's their business. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, super interesting. It's certainly, I'm always inspired by people who are around me who are very good at doing things, getting things done, not thinking too much about it. And
you're one of them, aren't you?
Yes, certainly the podcast, it's about figuring them out, coming across all sorts of challenges that somehow you do figure it out. I'd love to hear some stories about, it could be any of your businesses, but where there might have been just really unsurprising things that have happened. Perhaps it's a bit of luck, meeting someone to make something happen. The complexity, in my primitive experience in business, even getting the most simple things done right, is actually such a challenge, and how much the detail matters, and things are so much more complicated than meets the eye. Yeah, talk to me about
what things have happened. We got an early one was I when I did the lighting for the rock shows, I used to look at those rock shows and think, wouldn't it be great if these could be big sort of spectacles like Busby Berkeley did? And of course, in those days, there was rock and roll and there was show business, and never the twain should meet. There's a anathema. This is Music Man. And actually, I started a lighting company with a guy called Ricky Farr, who was the guy who put on the first Isle of Wight festival. And I didn't know how to run a company or anything like that, but I went and bought the lights and we did the thing. And amazingly, and Ricky actually, because he had good connections, he had a sound company and he got the gig to do one of the early Rod Stewart tours. And so I was going to do the lighting for it, which was a very big break for me at that time. Rod was just emerging as a major star. And the manager called up one day and said, Rod wants a great big white stage. And I happened to have worked in theatres, and I'd driven the Richmond Theatre van, so I knew my way around where you got rostrums and drapes and things. And also as a kid, I'd grown up. I was really keen on sailing. My dad used to take us sailing, and I used to draw these boats to scale, so I could use a scale rule. So the long and short of it, I got these drawings done and got a rendering done, and drew this stage up and took it round to see Rod Stewart and Billy Gaff, who was his manager. And Rod said, yeah, if it can travel, that's exactly what I want. And I went and got the whole thing together. And within a few months, I was a stage designer. I remember going out to a dinner party and somebody said, what do you do? I said, I'm a stage designer. I immediately got into a new world. And that led to all sorts of things. I remember getting a call from Harvey Goldsmith to say that with another guy, Paul Staples, he wanted us to go down and visit Paul McCartney's house in the country, because Paul, it was his first tour after the Beatles. He didn't really know what he was doing. Touring-wise, of course, later on he got to be very good at what he was doing, the great live acts of the world. But in those days he didn't. He was just playing theatres, and we went down with this stage design to do it. And, you know, what an amazing thing, down to his house in deepest Kent with horses grazing and him recording his new album in a run-down old barn. And he walked in and he said, who's for a cup of tea? Everybody for a cup of tea? And he was very self-deprecating. And at the end, he glanced up at this model that we'd bought of what the stage would look like. And he said, what's with all the zigzag bit? And it's a real Liverpool accent. And my friend Paul said, that's art. And he said, I know what art is I went to Liverpool School of Art. Which, of course, my generation, we all knew it. So hearing it from his mouth, so stuff happens when you. I think where we started is what you were asking me is for those happenstances that make things happen. And then I got into the TV business because a friend of mine I knew he was a big time. He did all the outdoor stages in Los Angeles for outdoor rock shows, and he had started buying the rights to jazz shows and selling them to TV because TV didn't have around the world, because TV doesn't have to dub music shows. And I said, that's a good idea. He said, well, could you help me? And I said, I'm at a loose end. I might have even said, I'm at a loss as to what to do next. Yeah. So we went down to the Cannes, not the film festival, actually, the television festival. They have 3 a year. And we went down there, and suddenly we'd met all these people from international TV stations, and we had the rights to a Billy Joel show, actually, Billy Joel in Russia and Elton John with a Philharmonic Orchestra in Sydney. And we sold the rights to people, and suddenly I was into a new business. But you have to say yes. You have to put your hand up and say yes. And be out of your depth and feeling a bit uncomfortable. So if you're feeling a bit uncomfortable, if any of your viewers are feeling a bit uncomfortable doing something new, that is a good place to do. That's it's one of my things, but that's what I think people do, is once you get out of your comfort zone, we're trained inherently to, as soon as something feels uncomfortable, to quickly jump back into where it feels comfortable again. But actually, what successful people do, whether it's a politician or whatever it is, like the pebble dropped into the water, the ripples go out and your comfort zone gets bigger. So being uncomfortable is a very good place to be sometimes, reasonable period of time.
And so uncertainty can be pretty hardcore. How do you get through the moments where you're like, oh gosh, Christ? You've made reference to fear being on one end and then excitement being on the other. How do you tame that dragon of the fear?
It's a pretty fundamental question, isn't it? Because how do you deal with stress? How do you deal with stress? And I think everybody's got their own way, and yet exercise certainly helps. I'm into rock climbing and sailing and all sorts of extreme sports, so I'd go to workouts. That's one way. But I think you work out. I sometimes say that on one shoulder I'm highly serious about everything, it's got to be great, and on the other side I really don't give a damn, because me and my ambitions are not important in the world. And how do you deal with that sort of stress? And I think this is a bit deep, this one. This is a bit deep. But one of the ones that I've got, I think you have these little things that you you talk to yourself. You can educate yourself. You can educate that brain, that little voice at the back of your head that's going on and commentating on your life and saying it won't work and everything. You can educate that. And I can't remember what I was saying. How do I educate myself? I remember.
Well, yeah,
ask me another question, and then I'll go back to.
Yeah, what you're here is as well is the gut. It's what's so clear about people's, whatever people build is so many people involved in building that. And
in building
what do you any project, any business?
Yeah,
So many people end up being involved in making it happen.
I remembered what I was going to say about the festival thing. Is that when at the time of your conception, your parents, I'm thinking about, you were the lucky one. And do you know how many others were trying to get a chance at life at that moment? It's 30 million. And you were the lucky one that got a chance at life. And sometimes I think that to myself. And I think I got a chance to live this life, just simply to be alive for a period of time. And I found that very helpful for trying to live in the present. And the other thing is about stress is that the things that you were worried about last week or last month or last year, you can't even remember what they were. They come and they go and they pass. So that was it. Anyway, we can move on to your next question now because
it's interesting. It's an interesting point. Recently I've come across a few people who talk about caring less. When they start to care less, things actually happen in a much more productive way for them. Are you quite good at? You strike me as a fun, sociable bloke. How much has having an ecosystem around you, let's call it friends or whatever you want to call it, has been part of you doing well and being happy?
I don't know. I'm quite gregarious and I like people and all of that. But somebody who's known me for a long time said to me the other day, he said, actually, Simon, gregarious as you are, you were a lone shark, really, weren't you? And it really took me back because I think there is some truth in that. I didn't have partners for the most part. I always thought that was more complicated. I ploughed my own furrow. No, I think I prefer to do things on my own and to have an idea and to just go for it and then to change. And certainly in the beginning of an enterprise, and I've had a few different enterprises I've done, even since Yo, I've done a fashion business. We've got the hotels, which is a much bigger business now than Yo Sushi. But at the beginning, in the first 1 or 2 or 3 years or whatever it is for you, I think being a sort of benevolent dictator and saying it's my way or the highway and this is exactly what we're doing and driving you through. I once had a nickname when I was in the television business, I later found out, called the steamroller, which is, they used to call me that, which is it's slightly embarrassing. But on the other hand, actually, sometimes it's what's needed. And so I think at the beginning of something, you can do that. But then you have to hand over and let others do things their way, not your way. And I was good at both those things. I was good at being a steamroller, and I was good at saying, actually, I've had enough. You can do this better than I can. Go on, get on with it. And that's what I did at Yo Sushi. Robin Rowland took Yo Sushi on. He always said it was 3 years. I always say it was 4 years in. But anyway, he took it on and he really built it up. And then Richard Hodgson has taken it over since him. And it allowed me to get on with the next thing, which was actually the beginning of the development of YOTEL, which I did with another guy, Gerard Green. He came in I said I didn't do things with other people. He did come in and he got that. I handed that over to him fairly early on. I did the first year and then I handed it over to him and said, okay, go for it. And in fact, I'm in Spain right now and he's got a new business out here in Spain called Off Grid that I'm his partner in because, what doesn't kill you, we had a fallout at one point, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it's a trusting relationship. I'm down here enjoying it. And he's about to open. It's called Off Grid, and it's in Catalonia, and it's a bicycling hotel. Catalonia Girona is the centre of bicycling of the world, I'm told.
Mallorca?
No, it's not. No, it's actually Mallorca as well. But Girona is on the Spanish mainland, right at the top, near the border with France, and that is a big biking area. You're a biker?
Yeah, I am actually. Yeah.
I'm new to it. I'm off on my electric bike, so I'm only a part-timer. But it's pretty amazing. This place he's done is just absolutely amazing, off grid. And you go out to I call biking the new skiing. And you go out of our little gates of the sort of mass, the chateau-ish thing we've got here, and we're straight onto the piste. And we've got a 1,000-metre mountain right next door, which I have got to the top of, actually, which is pretty cool.
In a time that you'd be willing to publicise?
Sorry?
In a time that you're willing to publicise, you're very proud of the time, or is it more the...
No, it's opening in the next couple of months. It's opening sort of midsummer. We're sort of soft opening it. Off-Grid Girona, I think it's called. I think the website's about to come out, Off-Grid Girona. So if you're into biking, that's a pretty cool place to go to. It will be anyway, I think.
Interesting.
He's good at doing it, yeah.
And
to say, he was my partner in YOTEL for the first 4 or 5 years. He opened New York, and then he actually left one way or another. And it was soon after he left that we had our big make-up and became close friends again. So it's nice to be doing something with him again.
What's important to you when you're looking for a business partner? Is it on a simple level, you can find people who you get on really well with or have different skill sets? Is it more, what does this all mean to you?
I wouldn't recommend to your viewers my own techniques because they're extremely unscientific. And I'll take on partners if I like somebody and I feel good about them. I'm embarrassed to say sometimes I don't even do very much research.
Yeah.
In fact, I did employing people. It's half a joke, but I think I did do it once, which was I like lucky people. You meet people who are just lucky. I call them desert island people. They're people who've just got such a good personality and they get lucky in everything they do, usually because they're good with people. And I call them desert island people. If you were stuck on a desert island, who you'd want to be with. Anyway, I like lucky people, so I used to shuffle up all the CVs and then throw half of them in the wastebasket, and that way you're left with the lucky ones. In many ways, it's as scientific as... No, I take on people, and I certainly take on partners, and give them 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, but I'm willing to cut bait. I remember hearing, this sounds quite shocking, but I remember meeting a guy in Bali, actually, who was a big sort of zillionaire type, and very nice guy. And he said, we were talking about this. And he said, you know something, Simon? He said, the thing I've learnt in all my years is that time to fire somebody is usually the first time you think of it. And it's the same with partners. If you're having your doubts, generally people don't change. I'm not saying just fire them or do it just like that. Generally people don't change, and if something's not going to work. And I think that's the same. I've got this thing about, with my doctor, I've told him I'm a hypochondriac. I want to get to all this stuff about, wait till you've got a symptom and then do something about it. Actually, I think in the future we won't cure diseases and the enormous cost of that. We'll prevent them. So I think it's the same with business, is if you can reach deep into your pocket and imagine the future and imagine what's going to go wrong. And that is a bit like just facing up to what the glitches are. The earlier you face up to something, the more you can do something about it. And there's always a solution. I think one of my little things is there's always a solution to everything if you can face up to it and do something about it.
Yeah. I was talking to an entrepreneur who set up another restaurant chain, and he was talking about the importance of people knowing themselves. And if you know yourself, then you can understand where the opportunities are for you. Do you resonate with that at all?
Knowing yourself. Yeah, it's a complicated thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think if everybody's world is as complex as the world that behind my face, what a very complicated world it must be out there. It's not surprising. Mine in its time, mine's pretty relaxed and calm these days, but in its time, mine's been a pretty dangerous neighborhood. So yes, of course I resonate with that. Yeah, sure.
And
know yourself, find some peace. Yeah, I think that's what I talk about really, because if you're talking about business, you can talk about where to raise money, you can talk about how to do a spreadsheet, you can talk about how to do this research or that research, but actually most of it is about getting yourself together, to what you're talking about, getting to know your strengths and weaknesses and all of that stuff. And mostly I can argue the opposite to pretty much anything that I say. So on the one hand, I could say spend figure out what you're good at and spend 90% of your time doing what you're good at and let other people do what they're good at. That makes sense. But by the same token, when you're starting something, do everything yourself. The last thing you need is a bunch of consultants and all the cost of that. And on the one hand, I could say, take advice and listen very carefully to what everybody says. But on the other hand, I could easily argue, ignore everything that everybody else says, because if it was a good idea, they'd be doing it themselves. So you've got to find your own modus operandus.
Yeah, well, find out what works for you. Is that actually different things work for different people,
Sure.
And it's easy to oversimplify.
Yeah, they're all talking shops. It's fun to talk to you about this stuff.
Yeah.
And anybody watching and listening to me, they're not going to do what I said, and they shouldn't do. I recommend that you don't do what I say, but you can take little bits from people. And I think as you're listening to somebody like me or like you or whatever, you just take little bits that think, okay, I could use that. I'm going to steal that. Certainly public speaking, I think, and I've done a lot of that and TV and all of that, is that what you do is you get to the person's manner and style, and that rubs off onto you. And you might remember 2 or 3 things that they said, but mostly it's the aura, if you like, that you give out. So develop your own aura.
Yeah, interesting. People, there's so much. The word exponentially is changing so quickly at the minute.
Exciting.
Yeah,
Live as long as I possibly can, for the sole reason that I want to see it all, what's going to happen, because that exponential curve, man, it's such an exciting time to live.
Yeah.
I was lucky growing up in the 60s and the music and all of that, and it was much easier to get into things and get started. But now, what opportunities.
And what do you do to stay involved in what's happening at the minute?
I try not to get involved in too many things, but that's difficult for me because I like ideas and I like seeing them happen. But I've learned to say no. I have a pretty nice life now. I've got a home in Thailand, I've got a home here in Spain, come to the UK a bit. And I've got enough things that interest me, doing things like this, trying to help other people. I've written an autobiography which is out at the end of next year. I've been building up to that, getting back in the public eye a little bit, hence I'm sitting talking to you. And I've still got an interest in both Sushi and YOTEL. There's planning, and then there's my daughter and my wife-to-be getting married next month to Ty. There's enough going. I'll tell you what, for me, this stage of my life, it's a mountaineering thing. There's an arête on a mountain, which is a very sharp bit like this. And if you're walking along the arête, you could fall down on either side. And for me, in my imagination, on one side is stress and the other side is boredom. So trying to walk that tightrope between not taking on too much stress and not getting bored, that's the game for me, is trying to stay involved with everything. And one way of doing it is to talk to people like you and other people who are doing interesting things and help out. Occasionally I will get involved in something financially or advice-wise or whatever, but I love to hear what people are doing and to give some input. And people do say, sometimes people say, that's really helpful.
And looking back, you're clearly very creative. In what parts of building the businesses that you've built have you enjoyed?
Robin Rowland, who ran Sushi for many years, is what I call an operator, and I'm an entrepreneur. So Robin would always be looking at the margins and the people stuff and analysis and market research and all of that. And I would only ever look at one thing, which is the top line. How do you get masses and masses of people to buy your product? Because all the rest for me, and I'm right actually, if you've got whatever you're doing, you want to be overwhelmed with the number of people who want your product and service. And you do that not by great marketing. You do that, this is a metaphor to some extent, but spending all the money that you can get hold of on doing something better and better and better. Because if you do something really better and really different and all of that stuff, it will always win, it will always shine through. You've got to hold a flag up above the parapet and wave it and say, look at us, we're here. Okay, you can call that marketing if you like. But just spending all the time. Sainsbury's say they like to, or Waitrose I think it is, they like to delight their customers. But in my 60s vernacular, I want to blow my customers' mind. The magic words for me are, I had this. The hotels they're a very good example. And at Sushi, if I'd said in market research, would you like to eat raw fish off conveyor belts with robots serving the drinks? You're not going to say yes. By the same token, when we open the hotels, they say, would you like to sleep in a 7 square metre room with no natural light? Because the windows in the early hotels looked out onto the corridor. Nobody's going to say yes. But when they walked into those hotels, people said, this is amazing. Because it was such detail, it was like some inside of an aeroplane or a private yacht or something like that. People said, the magic words are, this is so obvious, why hasn't somebody done this before? And that's what I'm after.
And getting things done, it's difficult to understand how the points on a project should one be, to get caught up in the granular. Do you have a view on how something that served you in terms of knowing when to move on in a project, or accept things that for startups, for many tech startups, you're told, at least in Silicon Valley, is to not produce the perfect product, just get it out there, get as feedback as
it's
possible.
I totally believe that. The number of people I hear, I say, they talk about raising money. I said, have you met an investor? No, we're waiting till our business plan is perfect. We've got the package. We've got when our deck is ready, we'll do it. And I go something. A deck or a business plan, for me anyway, is something that you leave afterwards for people to have a read of and be reminded of what you're talking about. And you can back up what you're talking about with some pictures and some images. But really, I think I had this on Dragon's Den, what you're investing in is the person, and you've got to be able to talk like I'm talking now, full of energy and passion and everything, and knowledge, and not be defensive. And when somebody says, what about this? It's a good point, I haven't solved that, or whatever it is, there's some honesty to it. So I think get out and be messy and make lots of mistakes and go off and see investors or whatever it is that you need, or estate agents or developers or whatever it is that you're doing. And it doesn't have to be perfect. But on the other hand, check and double check and triple check that it's as bloody good as you can possibly make it.
Yeah, one certainly needs this sort of obsession, this sort of huge care in the end outcome. How do you, today you're clearly a super curious individual, how do you look for new opportunities?
Especially you say it, that's an interesting word, because I think one of the most appealing things to me about people is enthusiasm. And an obsession, I suppose, is a close relation of enthusiasm. So I'm always looking for people who've got that sort of energy, and obviously who are going to put themselves on the line as well, so that I, as an investor, is going to be hurt less than they would be if something goes wrong. But how do I look? I just keep my eyes open. Where do ideas come from? I think, for me, I'm constantly looking at whatever I go or do, and I don't even put it into words, but I'm always looking at how things could be better and how I'd do something if I did it, and whether that's design or operation or the manner or website that I used. I think, has the guy even been on his own website? If those ones that drive you around the bend, or his own app.
Yeah.
And obsession's pretty good. But you can't do, I think at the beginning of something, you do 16, 18-hour days. And I find myself jumping out of bed just because that's what I want to do more than anything else. And talk about, you say, work-life balance. It's fun. If you can get it in the right place, it's just fun doing all of that stuff. But I don't think you can do it just for the desire to make money. Money is bloody great stuff, and I'm certainly no shame about saying that. It's amazing money, because when you have a hit and there's money rolling in, it oils the wheels of life. And if you have an idea, you can actually make it happen and do it.
Are there any people talk about the UK and the UK's economic situation in very varying degrees? I'm a big believer in the optimists tend to win generally. Do you have any views on
the UK and the?
I mean, let's say, you've got a lot of experience in hospitality. Hospitality businesses have certain challenges now. If you think about bars, a lot of people don't drink anymore. There's a lot of cost pressures. Do you think the UK needs a certain business at the minute? And
I think we're in a bit of a mess in the UK. And I think it'll take a long time to change it. I actually think that our culture is pretty negative. There's a lot of angry people around, a lot of difficult people, and I think actually that education is going to change so radically because we're going to have such instant access to information that you don't really need, and also that learning in schools will be self-learning. Kids will learn, teachers will no longer have to prepare lessons. The online learning will be so good, it'll be as creative as the very best mini-series. And if you can imagine that for every single lesson, you're going to be totally motivated as a kid if you can get it. So the thing that you've really got to do is to teach the whole person. And I think when what they're calling EQ now, emotional intelligence, i.e. solving the problems that kids have growing up and the things that stop them or make them rebellious or whatever, if you can make that every bit as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic, which are the ones that you have to basically learn, then in 10 or 20 years, we will start to turn out better and better adjusted people. And I think that the inequality of wealth in the world, especially as AI is going to decimate the middle classes, the working classes got hit. Probably the working class, if you're a plumber or electrician, you're probably in a very good place right now. But I think the middle class is going to get decimated. And I think to find a way to share out the wealth that all this innovation and AI and the rest of it creates so that you have a stable society is desirable for rich people as well as for the people who are suffering. And I think there's a great deal of suffering going on in the UK financially up against it. So I think that will happen. I think the system of government that we have was invented hundreds of years ago, and it's not what they call fit for purpose now. I really do think that is the case. I look at sort of Switzerland, where the people, to some extent, vote for what they want, and there's a small executive that implements that. And I think that's where I think actually that we'll have the income tax will give way to a wealth tax, which is means testing really, which AI will be able to do much better than it's ever been done before. And that ultimately, I don't know how many tens of years it will be, that we will pay for services like health, like education, even roads. We will pay rather like council tax is divided into different layers. We will pay by our wealth, and that will create a more equal society, not least of which because you'll only pay for health that you actually choose to take. So those are some of my ideas. I think we will have a normal, and also the way Parliament works, the argumentative madness. People look back in 50 years and say, how could they run businesses where they just spent their time throwing missiles at each other? What you need is an executive to implement ideas. We've had them since Eve first met Adam, but take it from me, execution's the key. And that's what government should be doing. So I think that'll change. And do you know what I think will be the moment is when we have digital voting. Because digital voting must come at some point, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's strange that even in another example is IDs to getting into bars or nightclubs. How is it that we still rely on a physical document?
Do you think digital voting, once we have digital voting, it will suddenly become obvious that we don't need to do it just once every 4 years and vote a political party in? We the people can give our opinions on what we want in the country that we live in, our democracy, on issues, not on people, and not every 4 years, on a day-to-day basis if we so wish. If you hang around government, the things they're always saying, what are the people thinking? What do they want? So I think all of that could happen. And then we might get good people in government, in that executive. We might get good people. But right now, why would people say you should go into politics? So I'm like, why would I go and get my head kicked in every day? You know, so you're never going to get any good people in there.
It's if you look at the way the world works, there are such. I remember I did a semester in Stanford, and everyone was very encouraged to work on projects that contribute to humanity. You talked about your business is only succeeding from creating value to people. I learned the other week that in Moscow you can pay with your face in a cafe, in a restaurant, pay by face. And I think where I'm going with that, albeit sounding quite abstract at this point, is on one hand, you've got places in the world where you can pay by face, and then places in the world where there's no clean water. How do you see us getting better at overcoming such a sort of uneven world in that sense? Not necessarily just about quality of living, but just how we end up allocating resources and time so in such an inefficient manner according to where they should be.
You know something, if
where they
we
can
did
create
nothing,
value.
if none of us talked about it and we did nothing, it would still change. It's already happening. There must be I would say, I mean, you can call me a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. But there must be some equalization of wealth. People look back in 100 years and say, how could, a bit like we look back at people going down the mine, how could there be such enormous inequality of wealth? And I think some of those ideas that I've been talking about will come and will happen, because that way you have a stable world. Because what's actually happened in my lifetime is that the world has become transparent. You can see how very rich people live, and you can see how very poor people live. Although I don't think most people, I've actually been poor in my time. And in my early days, I ran out of money before the end of the week. So I do know, and I hung out with the roadies and all of that. So I know what it's like to be, I know what poverty is, and at least I've got a taste of it. And I think unless you've actually had that, you can't even imagine how difficult that is, to despair and all of that. So I think,
that's interesting.
What do you think?
Yeah, I was just going to say that often those that end up contributing to those challenges have been through a similar experience themselves. I've got a friend who did AA, for example, and he's just got an incredible attitude and sense of empathy in terms of helping others. But to your point with philanthropy, for example, those just haven't had exposure. So is that going to be a big piece for you going forward?
I'd pay more tax, but it makes it an awful lot easier if somebody tells me I have to.
Yeah. And final question before we move on to the quick fire round questions, which is, if there's many parts of life, you're getting married next month, that's phenomenally exciting. What do you want more from your day, your week, the minute? Maybe it's a feeling, maybe it's learning about something, but perhaps you can think of...
Somebody asked me the other day, what's left on your bucket list? And I could honestly answer that I haven't got a bucket list. I've done everything I want, and I'm happy to live every day as it is. But if you're being serious about it, I'm 73, and I know you're going to say, no, you don't look it and all that. That's probably one of the reasons I said it. But I think it was 55 for your older viewers, or for the younger ones looking ahead. 55 was the year, that was the age that I realized for the first time that life doesn't go on forever. So that was a call to action, caveat emptor. Not caveat emptor, what's the other Latin word? Live for the day. And that was really good for me. Try and live in the day and try and make every moment count and have some fun and learn to be a bit peaceful. But I'd say that it sounds a bit heavy, but in some ways I'm preparing I'm going to go at some point, and I want to do my own demise as well as I've got this far in my life. So I want to die well, and I want to be comfortable to say and not be terrified of that. So that's something I think about a bit.
There's definitely a few people I can think of who have had a very nerve-wracking situation, which has changed their mentality on that exact topic.
Yeah.
And the extent of their gratefulness and the amount that they're present is there is quite an obvious switch.
What you probably don't know, and what I think a lot of the younger viewers don't know, is that in the 60s and 70s, we didn't talk about anything like this. That has been a radical change in the last 50 years. That love them or hate them, Big Brother and the Alan Sugar and all of them, what it has done is it's changed people to be able to talk, and also the conversations about what we now call mental health. I mean, it's gone over the top. It's just sort of feeling a bit depressed, but the fact that it's in the open. You started this out by saying you're very open and honest, Simon, but I don't think it's just me. I think as a society we're more and more open. Actually, I've learned as I've got older. I spend quite a bit of my time wearing my my thoughts and my feelings on my sleeve and reacting that way. And actually, as I've got older, you probably don't think it seeing me talking like this here, but I keep more to myself. I try and say a little bit less and listen a bit more. So maybe.
Not easy to do.
Yeah.
Speaking of listening, you made the most amazing quote, which I'm going to repeat the two quotes that I've got here. So the first is, to be a great blues singer, you have to suffer the blues.
Yeah.
And then you go on to say, one of the great things of life is that it's difficult. And that when you realise that's just normal, you stop complaining and make the best of it and put one step in front of another. There's something there about setting expectations.
Yeah.
Hey, let's be realistic.
Life is difficult, even for successful people. Sometimes you meet people who've just got a silver spoon and they seem to have swung through life. But I don't think that they have the depth of feeling that somebody like that blues singer that I was talking about, to have been through the ups and downs of life, gives you a much deeper, more compassionate, more understanding of life. I think it'd be harder to die, actually, if you'd had a silver spoon in your mouth all the time. And actually, I come across a lot of rich people. Money doesn't make... Well, does money make you happy? Definitely. The relief from the fear of not having money makes you happy, that's for sure. But you don't even want to hear this, but it can cause other problems as well. The fear of losing it and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And so we're going to move on to the quickfire questions.
Okay, all right.
And forgive me that some might touch on 3 things that give you joy.
Exercise, sunny days, and lovely people.
A mantra you would want to embrace would be?
Fuck it. As in, I call it the fuck it syndrome, as in, oh, to hell with it, let's just get on and do it.
One unusual thing that gives you pleasure?
One unusual thing that gives me pleasure. I don't know the answer to that question.
Sailing.
Actually, I'm into extreme sports and climbing, and the actual being in a fearful position on a climb, on a mountain, whether that's just for a few seconds or a few minutes, a few hours or days, the pleasure when it finishes is fantastic.
I'll be frank, I really don't want to think about that. It's stirring the nerves.
Yeah.
It's
like watching, what's the movie about that, Free Solo, and you know that the guy survives, but you still can't watch it.
The three wonderful points you make, which your 3 rules. Do you want to repeat them?
My 3 rules for life.
Yeah.
Don't try and change anybody, ever. Everything always works out, always. And the first one is, I can't remember the first one. What's the first one? Remind me. Gone out of my head.
Don't take things personally.
That is the big one. Don't take anything personally, ever. And I really, even though I forgot it then, I really do try and do that whenever anybody says the best response to somebody having a go at you, the best response is to lean forward and say, tell me more. Don't try and change anybody ever, because people don't change. And everything always works out, always, because, as I think I said earlier, what you were worrying about last week or last month, you can't even remember what it is most times.
Yeah. So I'm so grateful for your time, and I feel it's nice that you've gone on your journey and you spend time giving back, because it's clear you're clearly very compassionate, and you like being real with people, and that has a lot of that means a lot in today's world.
Yeah, and I like being successful too.
Yeah,
like succeeding.
Wonderful. Yeah,
but I don't mind failing it. Yeah, a bit of all of that.
Thank
you, Arthur.